on you now.
Thanks, Julie. Tanya and I have Google Slides, and I'm wondering, are we able to both control it? How do we?
Think so. I think whichever one of us is sharing the screen. Oh, I don't know. That is a good question. I don't think so. I suspect we'll see different things. I feel like whoever's sharing screen will do it.
All right, well, I'll start and then whatever. Okay.
Yeah, fair.
We're totally organized. All right. So let me do that. Oh, I can't share the screen.
Sorry, forgot to do that.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. All right. How are we looking? Do we have slides? Great. So thanks very much for joining us to chat about this. Tanya and I guess we're hoping to impart some, tricks and tips and what to do. We've got probably quite a few stories between the two of us of what not to do, but we won't dwell on that too much. And I guess hopefully what we want you to come out of this with is a bit more confidence, or some confidence or more confidence in how to deal with the media in all kinds of forms, and how that is really quite different across different types of media. So if you want to get in contact with us, obviously through ASSAB is possible, but these are also our contact details. So we have Twitter and our websites, and I noticed that we've gone for the same visibility strategy, where we've both used our full names for our Twitter handles and our website. We can talk a little bit more about, why we've decided to do that, and how we've converged on that strategy. But it is worth, as part of your media profile and all of that sort of stuff, thinking about these naming ideas, conventions, whatever. All right, so I guess the first place we think of starting is, should you do it? Should you talk to the media as a scientist? And I think there's really times when it's great, and there's times when it's really fine to say no, And the main kind of yes reasons are sort of personal philosophies about whether you think that science should be communicated to the public, what kind of responsibility you have as a scientist to tell the public about what you're doing, which is often driven by, ideas about public scientific literacy, but also where your money's come from, where your money's coming from. A lot of our science is publicly funded. It's also good for you though, because it really does develop your communication skills. It's quite a different kind of skill than giving, a scientific talk or some kind of PowerPoint presentation in undergrad or whatever. And it really requires you to hone your messages and speak in plain language and get to the point quickly, and all these things that we're not very good at as scientists typically. Usually we put the arguments and then come to the conclusion. And when you're working with media, you really want to put sort of headlines up first and things like that. Another really important reason, and this is something that I think I'll come back to quite a bit as we're talking about these things, is if you're really excited and passionate about the topic and you think that topic should be more visible, more well understood by the general public, then that's a really, really good reason to do media. And it also means, it has this little, for me at least, it has this little mental trick of meaning that it's not about me, it's about the thing I'm talking about, and that the thing I'm talking about is the important thing. But like I said, there's also a lot of reasons why you might not want to do media. We are all really strapped for time a lot of the time, and it's really okay to say, look, this one I just can't do today, or whatever. Sometimes you just have to say no because of that. It is also okay though if it really freaks you out, right? Like this can be very daunting, and it's okay to say, look, I'm really uncomfortable with this. But I think that the challenge is to try to develop the skill so that you can say yes. If you're at a stage where you just feel like, oh, that is way too far for me, that's okay. Don't push yourself to be really over that anxiety mark, but maybe recognize it and think about doing something about it. And then obviously a really important one is if you're not willing to talk to whoever it is that's interested because, you know, they're just going down a whole different path than what you're willing to go down. Maybe the particular journalist or the particular outlet or something is, you know, very well known for a particular kind of philosophy that you are absolutely against. And so you don't want to contribute to that. And that's absolutely fine, of course, and actually really important. And you know, we can share some anecdotes about those kinds of things if you're interested. So I think doing media is great, particularly because it gives airtime to things that may not otherwise not get any attention. And obviously, you know, we don't have science segments in the news very often, like we do with sports, for example. So any opportunity to talk about science that you think you could take, that you're comfortable with, I think is a really good idea. But there's all these little things that come up in my mind. Here's just, you know, a few of the ones that have come up in my mind over the years, and I'm sure you all have maybe different ones or the same ones, that prevent you from saying yes to these kinds of opportunities. I'm not an expert in this. It's probably tied in with I'm not the best person. You know, sometimes we get approached by the media, and we know that actually, you know, the cockroach expert, person they should be talking to, is somebody else. And it's a really difficult one because you can either refer them on, or you can say yes, or you can do both. But I think there's I've got a Venn diagram coming up in a little while that sort of talks about what you know about and what you're willing to talk about, and where those two things sort of mesh is what you have to decide. So sometimes it's good to say yes to things just because you're being asked and you can do it, and maybe these things are on very short time frames. Things on longer time frames, you know, you could refer people on and so forth. Yeah, I'm just so belittling yourself, I'm just a PhD student, I'm just an undergrad, I'm just a lecturer, I'm just a whatever, you know, I'm just an Australian, I can't talk about monarch butterflies, whatever the case may be, right? Those things will always come up. And I think, again, if you feel like you can say something about the topic, chances are you're not going to get asked by the journalist something really difficult. It's going to be pretty generalized knowledge. Then, you know, try to combat that thought of immediately minimizing your ability. I don't like how I look or how I sound. That one's a tough one. I just decided to stop caring, even though I still feel like that. So I definitely feel very self-conscious about my voice, how I look, all that sort of stuff. But I come back to that idea of, I want people to know about this. I think this is an important topic. Get over yourself, Kate, and talk about it. But I don't think that that's a trivial thing. I think it can be really, really challenging. But like I said, if you try to externalize it and make it about the content and not make it about you, at least for me, that's helped. And again, also with this shameless self-promotion kind of idea, like if you, again, thinking about it, not being you, it's not you that wants to be, you know, I mean, it's okay if you do want to be, that's great, you know, go be a TV star, awesome, you know, fantastic. But if you feel self-conscious about it, then one way to combat it is to think about it's the content. Yeah, what will other people think? You know, we hear rhetoric of, oh, such and such was talking about climate change the other day, and they're not a climate scientist, they're a geologist, and no, and they should be talking about that. Or, you know, people often cite Dr. Karl as an example of, he doesn't know about this thing, he's a generalist, not a specialist. I don't know, I mean, haters gonna hate, I guess, right? Like, I feel like there's no way to kind of control what people think about it. And I think if you're realistic with yourself about what you feel comfortable talking about, and that you feel comfortable saying, I don't know, when you don't know, then I think you can kind of get away from that one. Okay, so attracting media. So, you know, a lot of the time early in your career, you won't necessarily be approached by media, but you might want to attract media. there's a lot of ways to do that. And there's some really important points about timing. So one of the best ways is to write a press release with your media people at your university, if you're at a university or whatever institution you might be at. You'll often get help writing it. So maybe you send a paper or something, they want to talk to you about it, then they might draft it up and send it over to you. So it's not actually necessarily all on you. And the beauty of that is that news outlets from all over the world can grab that text and they can do what's called syndicate it, which is some kind of media term that I'm sure someone else understands better than I do. But essentially, it just means that it gets shared, as far as I can tell. Of course, social media, your own and others, but maybe you don't have a really huge following. If you don't, then, like, for example, ASSAB really wants to share, your work. That one of the major things that the society wants to do is to promote science on animal behavior in this region, right? So try not to be backward in coming forward about, hey, I wrote this paper and could you please share it with, with the society, because that's what it's all about. And again, it's about the content. It's not about you. It's about this cool thing that you found out about the natural world, and everyone should know because it's amazing. And then once you get a little bit further on with dealing with media, you can actually contact journalists directly. And, maybe you get a sort of a really nice working relationship with a couple of people that you trust. So for example, some people from the ABC, like Anne Jones, for example, she's wonderful and has a similar kind of philosophy about how to communicate science. So you find these people over time. It's good to trust outlets, but obviously you should be somewhat cautious. We can probably go into a little bit more detail about how to deal with that. It's always nice to go in though, trusting, but you might want to ask advice from colleagues that have dealt with different media outlets and just say, hey, got approached by these people. What do we know about them? Are they like, are they on the same page, or, if you're not sure.
I can jump in for a sec, Kate.
Yeah,
I
please.
think the other thing to keep in mind is I think there's a risk that we end up just sort of preaching to the choir and staying in our bubble. We love the ABC. The ABC is great. Don't really like some of those other radios. I do think there is some utility in dealing with media that's maybe outside of our normal comfort zone. You want to be careful that obviously they're not going to come at you and try to, twist your words, but it is useful. And I mean, I've spoken to a couple like more conservative radio stations, and in all the cases, they haven't been trying to trap. It's been more like, hey, tell us about this topic. And I look at it as an opportunity to get to an audience that I normally can't reach. So I think it is worth making sure that it is a legitimate media organization and not, something a little bit dodgy that's very likely just going to mess with you. But, the more mainstream ones, even if they kind of swing maybe potentially to a part of the media that you don't normally engage with, it can be worth it. But especially when you're just starting out, absolutely. Always check. Like I always check to kind of get some background on them before.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, the whole point of doing media is to try to get out of our bubble, right? And so we do want to take those opportunities where we can. And then timing, timing is really critical, particularly for scientific publications. Places like, New York Times or whatever, they don't want to know about publications that have already been published. Most of the time they want to know, as soon as you've got a paper accepted, they want to know that it's coming out, and because they want to run the story first, right? Or like right as the paper comes out, that they want to print it that day, or whatever the digital modern day equivalent of printing it is. And big journals like Nature and stuff have embargoes, so the media kind of can find out about it, but no one's allowed to talk about it until a certain date and all that sort of thing. That's really, really important. So if you've got a paper coming out that you're really excited about, that you think might be really interesting for the media, then you need to sort of have a plan. You need to be ready. Of course, people might contact you after your paper's published and still want to talk to you about it, but if you really want to kind of generate a bit of a splash about it in a really timely way, then beforehand is the way to go. And then, of course, once you've got the attention or somebody's contacted you, what do you do about, like, you know, with the actual content of what you say, and how do you control it? And, you know, this is definitely where the trust stuff comes in. And it can be, you know, it can be very nerve-wracking if someone calls you up and said, I'm going to record everything you say, that's okay, right? And you're like, oh, sure, that's fine. I'm sure I'm not going to say anything silly. Which would be like the first time in my life. But with print media, especially, you know, magazines, newspaper articles, that kind of stuff, you can always ask if you can see the text before it's sent out. They often, it really varies as to whether or not people will say yes to that, but what they will often say is that they'd be happy to send you your direct quotes and make sure you're okay with the direct quotes that they're going to use from you. It's all based on, you know, they're really short, like with news and stuff, they're really short timelines. So it can be impossible, but it's worth asking, because oftentimes it will be possible. But really important, if you're being recorded, or what you say in an email or whatever, it's okay for you to actually correct yourself, right? So if you say something, you're answering a question, and then a few seconds later after you've said it, you think, oh, no, I realized that it didn't come out the way I wanted or whatever. You can say on the recording, you know, oh, wait a minute, can I say that again? Or wait a minute, can I, you know, I don't want you to use that. I want to say it this way. And you can kind of maintain control of what you, you know, what you put out there. It's obviously unethical for them to go against that, because that's also on the recording that you've said, actually, no, sorry, I don't want you to use that. I'm going to say it again in a way that I want you to use it, and those sorts of things. So remember that it doesn't have to be, I mean, obviously live radio, whatever, you only get one shot. But if you're being recorded for these sorts of magazine articles or long format news, or it's sort of early in the, before the paper's published, that kind of stuff, that's possible. And another really powerful tool in your kind of negotiating your content, quiver. I think you only have arrows in your quiver typically, don't you? Tool belt, toolbox. I'm just going to roll with some ambiguous, some very poorly thought out analogy there. Say I don't know. Say I don't know. I say I'm not comfortable talking about that. It's too far outside my expertise. You know, whatever. Say, oh, yeah, I'm not sure. You know, but you should totally talk to my friend Tanya about that. She knows heaps about slime molds. If people are interested in that, you could check out the website of this person or that person, whatever. Yeah, I think it's really, really important, because it allows you to take on discussing things that might be, you know, tangential to your direct research, right? Because we're really unaware of how much expertise we actually have, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to like the absolute experts in a field. You know, I might think, I can't talk about butterflies. My God, what do I know about butterflies? Because I know all these people that know so much about butterflies, but actually, I can probably answer a few questions on the radio about butterflies. You know, I did actually screw up a question that I was asked on the radio a little while back about butterflies, but hey, nothing bad happened, right? At least as far as I know. So, you know, so I think that is really important. It's okay not to know. And I think, I don't know, Tanya, you might have similar experience, but I think people like to hear scientists say, I don't know. I think it makes them sound more like a human. You know, we all have limits to our knowledge.
I think it also helps with the sense of mystery sometimes. Like if you present that I don't know as like an interesting I don't know. So somebody will ask me something, I'll go like, I don't know. In fact, that hasn't been very well studied and it's kind of a mystery and it'd be really cool if we knew the answer. Or, you know, that's not something that I've been able to research, but I'm sure some of my wonderful colleagues may have, if it's something that you think has been researched, it's just not you. But for a lot of things, just nobody knows. Like there's a surprising amount of stuff that nobody knows. Right. And that's kind of fun, I think, for the public to realize that it's not like science is done now.
Right. Right. And I mean, you could always just play the why game with a 3-year-old, right? Like, why, mum? Oh, because of this. Why? Oh, because of that. Why? Oh, I don't know. I think it's got something to do with quantum physics. You know, like you just, it helps you say, I don't know. And this kind of all relates to this idea of what your style is, you know, and we all have very different styles. I really admire people that can be serious and carefully thought out when they're giving up presentations like this, but that's just not who I am naturally. But how do you find yours is really the key. And I think, you know, it's hard to get away from practice as being a really important way to find your style, which means that you're probably going to suck a little bit when you first start. And that's okay, you know, because you're probably not going to suck so badly that it's going to be like career limiting or something terrible like that, you know. We all have to be kind of willing to be not perfect at stuff when we start out. But you can start small. You don't have to start talking, you know, you have to go on breakfast TV or something as your first thing, right? But there's a lot of good training courses, and a lot of, you know, universities run training courses in media, and the Academy of Sciences and all kinds of places where you can get media training. I think there's, for a while there were some scholarships, some media training from various, like from SBS and ABC and those sorts of places. But yeah, if something pops up, even like just a half-day thing or something, you can always jump into it. But the key really is storytelling. So the key is how do you tell a story, and how do you tell a story, right? We know that stories have to have a beginning and a middle and an end, right? Like that's what we learn at school. But how best to present information is something that humans have done since humans existed, but the style in which to do it can vary enormously. And I think you really have to try to be true to yourself, because so many of the media opportunities you get almost no preparation, that I think you really need to, you know, be natural when you're doing it. Be your, I don't know, put your best foot forward, obviously, but have some kind of natural style that you don't have to, you know, switch on and write scripts for yourself and things, because it's just not realistic in these kinds of things. But there are some tricks that can help you. And for some reason, signaling the end of when you've answered something is a really, really important one. You can, if you go up at the end of your sentences and little things like that, it's very difficult for the audience, but it's also difficult for the audience and the interviewer if they're not sure if you've answered the question, if you're not finished, they don't know if they can ask you something new and all this sort of stuff. So just sort of saying, you know, oh yes, this insect lives in the Blue Mountains. And you just you stop, you go down at the end of your sentence and you stop, and that allows them to take, you know, oh right, whereabouts in the Blue Mountains? Oh, it's in Springwood, da-da-da, you know, and then, and it's usually found on this kind of a plant. Just kind of cut yourself off at the end and it passes the ball back across. That can really help the conversation flow. And it sort of fits into this next thing about don't try to give all the information you've got in one big hit. Let them pull it out of you. Most of the interviewers you'll work with are really skilled and they know where they want to go. And you just have to keep your answers short and sweet. So just a couple of things that in conversations tend to work really well that I've found. There's tons more. Oh God, okay, here's the bit where I embarrass myself. So, so one of the main things that you're going to want to be doing, of course, is something called pitching, whether it be, you know, it's essentially just explaining why the thing that you're talking about is worth talking about. I'm going to hand over to you to talk a little bit more about these bullet points, Tanya, but I just thought I might put in this video of me. This is really, you know, talk about being self-conscious about how you look and how you sound. You know, this is not fun for me to show this, but I think it's useful because this is my audition for the Superstars of STEM program when it first started. So we had to send a 1-minute pitch on our research. This took me 56 takes. And I still don't like it, but this is what I sent. So if you want to check, hopefully this will come through. Just let me know if you have a sound issue.
Hi, I'm Dr. Kay Numbers. I'm a biologist and I'm a lecturer in zoology at Western Sydney University. I'm out here in the rain, in the mountains, to tell you about why I love doing research in the Australian Alps. And it's because it's a unique ecosystem to Australia, but it's threatened by climate change. And the problem is we don't have very much information about how the animals survive up there. So my research aims to fill that gap and want to get more knowledge and understand how these animals behave, how they survive extreme temperatures, why some of them are brightly coloured, and how they're distributed across Australia's sky islands. Ultimately, what I want to do is I want to share the stories of our Australian alpine animals with Australians and the world. I want to encourage people to get up into this region and see that for themselves so they can also become champions of the Australian Alps.
Like, I can't tell you how many things about the video I dislike. My body language, I messed up something I wanted to say. You know, look at my face in the thing there. There's so many things I don't like about it. But it was the best one I could come up with in like a whole afternoon of filming the same thing over and over in the rain. But it got me into the program, so it must have been good enough, right? So that was the sort of, you had to say your whole research in 1 minute. So that was the challenge. Yeah, so Tanya, do you want to jump in on this slide? Is this the slide you're jumping in on? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think this is the one. Do we want to either, I can share it or you can keep sharing it and I can like gesture or something? I don't know what's easier.
What degree of difficulty do you want to try?
Let me see if I can, give me one moment here.
I'll unshare and you share, yeah?
Yeah.
Oops,
Okay. Will this work? Oh yeah, there we go. Sorry, it's sharing from a different place, but there, sweet. Oops, sorry, Kate. Cool, can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so pitching your science. This is the bit that can be a bit tricky, I think, especially if you're not accustomed to thinking, like Kate said, of your science as a story. And that's really important because the media, essentially they want different things from you. And I'm going to go through in a bit, like different styles of media and what sort of things they might be asking for. But in general, when you're thinking about talking about your science, it's really important to link it to something that regular people will care about. And I think we can get so far down our like super narrow, specialty that we kind of forget that our research connects to other people. And it's about figuring out where that connection is. Sometimes it's really easy. So if you're studying something that impacts on people's daily lives in any way, then that can be a nice place to start. And like, oh, we've all noticed that Christmas beetles are declining. Let me tell you about this great research that, we're doing, or something more connected. In other cases, it doesn't have to have that applied side as well. It can be a first, like I'm the first person to find out this really cool thing, or we were the first research team to discover this really interesting behavior. And it's interesting because, and I feel like sometimes we forget the because we know that our stuff is interesting because of all these exciting behavioral theories that are being shattered by this new animal. People don't know that necessarily. So you really have to walk them through it. And it's not that you're dumbing it down. It's that you're kind of making it into something that's interesting to somebody who maybe has no background in behavior or no background in the thing you're studying. Is it amazing in some way? I mean, even if your organism has absolutely no impact on anybody's day-to-day life, it's not a first, there's usually something cool about it. So for example, I've done a couple interviews about velvet worms, which we've been studying, and they have very interesting social behaviors, but that's not the part people hook on. It's the fact that they shoot glue from little nozzles on their heads to catch their prey. And that is the cool bit. That's amazing. And that's kind of the neat thing that then you can kind of use that as a way to talk about it. But there's also all these interesting social behaviors that, are very unique to this particular species. And you get there later. And then I think enthusiasm is really important. And I think you can see that really well in Kate's video. You can tell she cares, and you can tell that she's passionate about her subject, and people will just go along for the ride. It doesn't matter almost what you're talking about, but if you're excited and interested in it, then people will listen and pay attention. So it's really worth taking some time to think about for each of the parts of your research, where is the hook? Like, where is the story? Is it because it's solving a problem in daily life? Is it really cool? Is there a cool hook? And it's really useful, I think, even for us to kind of remember why we do things. So it's a nice to be like, that's why I'm studying this, because it is interesting for this reason, or it is going to have an impact. Yeah. So I think the next thing we want to do is kind of walk through different forms of science communication, because there's lots of different media types, I guess, yeah, out there, and they're all a little bit different. So between the two of us, we have a pretty big experience across radio, newspapers, podcasts, paid writing for magazine articles, television, documentaries, all of these things. And so, they all have different aspects and things to think about. And so we've got kind of this Venn diagram, just sort of thinking about how these different things interrelate, like your research questions. Can you think of some part of that that might be interesting to the media? Because there's also studies that we all know are not going to be media interesting. Like, we all have those things we do. Like, I think this is cool for scientists. I am entirely aware that nobody outside of my bit of academia will care. And that's fine. Like, not everything you do needs to be something you take to the media. That's fine. And then there's which things you're asked about to talk about in the media. And those may not be your research questions. I would say that now at this point, more than 90% of the media requests I get are not about specific papers or specific aspects of my research. They are much more general, like, hey, tell us about this insect question, or I read this paper that I had nothing to do with. Can you comment on it? Or are those sorts of media engagements? So, Kate said earlier, it's also about realizing that your expertise is a lot broader than you might realize. And there's kind of an overlap between those three things. You're trying to find the sweet spot of things that you can talk to that kind of intersects with your expertise and which you feel comfortable chatting about to the media. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Kate?
I'd just like to apologize for the Venn diagram. I made it and I don't really know if it represents what I think it represents. I was really not sure about how to make it overlap in a meaningful way. And I don't have much of a brain at the moment because I'm so pregnant that I just, but yeah, I think you covered it. So
cool. I mean, I was just winging it at that point, but yay. Yes, score. Improvising is an important skill for dealing with the media.
But it really, really is, actually. I think it really is. We'll suggest some exercises later.
Yeah. So to start with what I think is probably the least intimidating, I'm going to kind of go from least intimidating to most intimidating. Written work is in a lot of ways a good entry point into science communication because you get time to revise your words. You can really think about how you want to frame the story. It's also a good way to get your research out there because there are outlets like The Conversation where anybody who is a researcher at a university can pitch a story. And then they will get back to you and say like, yeah, we think this is great. A lot of times what I get when I pitch a story is like, we're not so interested in this, but how about this slightly different story? Can you write that? I'm like, okay. And once you get a couple articles in The Conversation, you'll find it kind of really starts to pick up because the editors know you. And if they have an idea, for example, I got an email a couple of days ago from one of the editors being like, I've noticed a lot of pantry moths. Can you write something about them? Okay, sure.
Clean out your flour.
Right, like, I don't know, freeze it before you, anyway, I will have tips once I do some Google scholaring to find out more about pantry moths. So yeah, you start to get contacted by them, but The Conversation also, is syndicated. I don't know what the word is for how they work, but other media outlets can pick up conversation articles globally. And so I didn't put them up here, but I've had some of these articles translate into like 10 different languages. And I can see them because I have a little Google alert that lets me know whenever my name pops up in the media. And there'll be languages I do not speak, but they've been translated. The ABC will also pick up sometimes stories from The Conversation. So you can get that exposure, which kind of links into getting radio and other types of exposure. So it's a very useful way, I find, to show your research. It doesn't pay you anything. The conversation is a free media outlet, so that's the negative side. But I think in terms of just having a place to do these different stories, yeah, it's a really good outlet. It's also really interesting because you start to see where people's interests lie. It's like I've written, I think, 18 different conversation articles at this point, and by far the most cited one is this one about Maria Sibylla Merian, which is more history. It's not at all connected to my research, but people like to read about people. So weirdly enough, that's the thing that gets cited the most. So I enjoy writing for the conversation because I also take it as an opportunity to learn something that I don't necessarily know heaps about. Like I have enough expertise to be able to write the article, but I get to kind of do a little bit of background research and kind of, learn a little bit more. So I think written news is really good. There are other outlets, of course, like the ABC sometimes will hire, will ask you to write articles. I've done some stuff from the ABC. They generally don't pay, or they pay very little for that type of work. But it's a good way to get started. So then the next kind of slightly more intimidating is to write for things, I find, to write for things like magazines. You usually do need, occasionally they will approach you, but often you need to have a pitch. And there are a number of outlets that will take unsolicited freelance pitches. And I'll put that URL in the chat at the end. But that's a list of all the media outlets that have paid, that will take unsolicited publications and which pay you for it if they accept your story idea. So, it's worth getting a bit of a portfolio in something like The Conversation first, because often they'll ask you what your writing experience is. And it's nice to be able to say, see my portfolio of articles I've written previously. But they often pay reasonably well. Like you will get a couple $100 or more for your stories. And they'll do all the professional editing for you. So they can be really cool outlets to work with. And it is nice to get paid sometimes. That's assuming that you're writing the article. There are also opportunities where people who are writers will contact you to be interviewed. Typically won't be paid for that, but it's another way to kind of get your name out there, because the article will essentially be about you or about something that you've done or asking for your opinion. And those interviews are usually pretty cruisy in that they might record it, but they'll check your quotes. You don't have to worry so much about messing up, because you can say, oh, just forget what I just said. That's totally wrong. Let me try again. And they're just going to transcribe it. So that's that type. I guess the next kind of level of intimidating are things like radio and podcasts, because now you don't have as much time to think about what you're going to say. Pre-recorded shows are much easier because they will edit it. And generally, in my experience, people who are editing radio shows are trying to make you look good. So they're not going to they usually aren't going to cut it in a way that makes you sound silly. They're going to cut out some of the like, oh no, I don't know, like those kind of stutters and things. They'll make you sound good. So those ones aren't so bad. Once you have some experience in that, live radio is a lot more scary because things are going out pretty much right away. And if you mess up, it's much harder to take it back. But again, I think it's just becoming comfortable with speaking and with realizing that if you mess up, it's not the end of the world, because unfortunately, not that many people are actually listening. So, it's really unlikely that one person who knows you said something wrong is going to hear it and like write a nasty letter or anything like that. Most people are never going to hear it. You have your moment, they get a cuppa, calm down and move on. Everybody has messed up on the radio who's been on the radio. It's just a thing that will happen. Sometimes those radio shows, particularly in the before times, you would often go into the studio and sit down in the recording booth. Nowadays, the ABC is using phone and various apps, sometimes Zoom, to kind of be able to manage COVID safe recording. So, it may vary a little bit between whether you're doing something on essentially the phone versus whether you're going in and getting the full recording studio. Podcasts, like, I don't know, internet radio, whatever we call it, what radio turned into. These are always pre-recorded. There's a huge variety of topics and different presenters. I find that they are much more variable than the radio in terms of the quality of the podcast. And that's because anybody can do a podcast. And so you'll get some that are like hyper produced, like Radiolab style podcasts where they've got lots of editing and sound engineers and everything. And you get ones that are basically some person who, is just doing a podcast and it's not quite as sleek. It's up to you which of those you choose. I've done both. I tend to do the higher quality ones more now just because I'm a bit more time limited than I was, but they've all been fine. Because they're pre-recorded, again, you will be edited, but it is a little bit more variable, I would say, than radio in that, in some cases they may be very good at kind of editing you to make you look good. Otherwise, some other times perhaps not as much. But again, nobody's ever tried to like trap me into saying something bad or tried to edit me to sound like I was saying something I wasn't. So I've had pretty much all good podcasting experiences, and it's just fun because you get to meet somebody that you might not otherwise talk to, and they're usually pretty keen. And my word of advice would be just to listen to what they've done previously. Even look at other episodes of that show. If it's a new show, have they done anything in the past? And then you can kind of get a sense of their style and what the tone of the show is likely to be. Okay, so now getting into what I think for me is the most intimidating, which is TV and on-camera stuff. Because like Kate was saying, it's one thing to be self-conscious about how you speak, which I am extremely self-conscious about how I sound. It's even worse when it's all of you, and you've got to worry about like, do I use my hands too much? And what is my face even doing most of the time? Like, it just won't stay still. And, all of these things coming together to just be incredibly self-conscious. And I don't really have a workaround. For me, it's bad enough that I basically just don't watch anything that I've recorded. There are whole documentaries that I have not seen about myself because I cannot watch myself on TV without just feeling really awful. Same with most of my recorded work. I don't really listen to most of it. I'll read the transcript sometimes just to get a sense of what happened, but I hate hearing myself. So, if you are like me and you feel very self-conscious, you can still do this sort of stuff. Like the simple workaround is just don't watch if it's going to bother you. There's a whole range of TV and documentary sort of stuff. So the first category, which I guess, well, it's both intimidating and not intimidating, are the short news spots. These are usually when there's been some sort of event or some publication you've produced or someone else has produced, and a media organization wants to get you right now. Maybe they'll call you up and say, we need you this morning, or maybe by the weekend. It's a very short time frame typically, which means you don't usually have as much time to prepare as you might like, because you very likely will be called in to come in the next day or something. This is usually tied relatively closely to your expertise, because they're contacting you because you're an expert and they want some expert feedback. So having said that, it's not necessarily your research. So I think it was a couple of years ago, there was that study that broke about insect Armageddon or something terrifying that was going around. And I went on Sunshine in the morning and then the ABC News and a few other outlets just to talk about insects in general. And like, are we all going to die tomorrow? And, is this something we should be concerned about? And what's driving it? And those sorts of things. And yet they were all very short, kind of come in, do your thing, leave. It's over very quickly, kinds of things. So I think they're fun. They are a bit more intimidating in the sense that you don't, the editing, they're often, some of them are live. So this one was live. So there is no editing, like you just kind of say what you say. They can be a little high stress because you're in a studio, there's lights on you, and you're like, what should I even wear? All of these things are kind of going through your mind. So yeah, I enjoy it, but I think that's probably one of the most stressful types of media that I do, are these short kind of on the spot media stuff, because you can't, there's no take backs really. But again, very few people are watching. So at the end of the day, if you mess up, it's not going to matter. Kind of the next level in terms of time commitment, I'd say, are documentaries. And so these are great because you do get do-overs. They're filming a lot of film. So if you say something wrong, you can always say, oh, I'm sorry, I stuttered. Can I go back? And that's fine. But the time commitment can be surprisingly long. So I have done, I think, 4 documentaries, one for Catalyst, which was 2 episodes, 2 for Nova, one on edible insects and one on slime molds. The Catalyst one for those 2 episodes was months and months of shooting. Not every day, but a couple shoots a week, sometimes all day. It's been 20, a good 8 hours recording stuff. I didn't actually add up my total hours, but it was a lot. So it is not a trivial time commitment. Often with those documentaries, they'll also be asking you to do sort of advisory consulting-ish sort of work. So it's not even just like, come and do these lines or talk about this. It's like, oh, what should we talk about? What is the interesting thing here? And they may ask you to fact check as well. So I'd say the time commitment here is a lot bigger than it is for pretty much any of these other types of media. It's also, what's the word? It can be a little bit more, it can be quite exhausting in some ways, because you will be asked to sometimes do the same take like 20 times because a bird flies through, or they're not really sure, they want to do it from a slightly different angle. And it is much more intensive than any of the other forms of media because it's going to be a lot more polished at the end. Often I found with the documentaries, they tend to be less tied to your specific research and much more about you as a presenter of broader research. So, the things that I've been asked to do these sort of documentaries are more like honeybees in general. I am not just, I don't know obviously I don't know everything about honeybees, but I'm there more in the role to present that science to people rather than being the expert myself, if that makes sense. So you need to know enough to be able to obviously give them good advice and to be able to kind of figure out answers to all of these questions, but they tend to have a much broader focus than your specific research. So, I think it is, of all the media types, I do think it's worth having a good think about whether this is a kind you want to do, because it is a bigger time commitment. It is a lot more effort. And I think the pros are that you tend to reach a much broader audience. And it can be an audience beyond sort of your local one in a much more significant way than I think a lot of other media types are. So like, for example, the Nova documentary I did on slime molds hasn't actually been released in Australia, but it was released in the US quite widely. And that's just a huge audience of just people watching TV, on their Sunday nights are watching this program, which is an audience I probably would never have gotten a hold of otherwise. Like I don't have that kind of reach on my own. So that's really cool. It's a good way to make contacts. Not so much academic. Sometimes you get academic contacts, but also because I suspect all of these different folks who produce these things are talking to each other, because once you do one, you can find out, like, pass your name on to somebody else. And so the next time there's a documentary even tangentially related to you, they go, oh no, she did a really good job. And you end up getting more and more calls because of those connections amongst media outlets. You also find that different types of media will get involved. So the Eating Insects documentary, which hasn't even been, I don't think has been released yet, they've talked to their podcast people. So now they'll be doing a podcast on that. And people who listen to that podcast will likely, it'll trickle to a bunch of different media types. So it's a really good way of getting that much bigger media network going. It's also really fun. I really enjoy it. I don't like watching it, but I enjoy doing it. Partly because you get to see how TV works, which is wild. So, like, for example, this is just a still from the slime mold documentary. It looks like I'm in a lab, but because I was there, I know this is just a hotel conference room. And they spent a good hour transforming it into a lab. Like, the microscope, I don't think is real. The desk situation is really just pieces of paper they've kind of arranged to make it look like it's a sealed desk. Like, the stuff on the wall are just random bits from a magazine they hung up and a map to try to make it look like it was a sciencey sort of situation. I find it fascinating to see how that works. And also to realize how many takes it actually does take to kind of, I can't keep looking at myself, how many takes it actually takes to make even a tiny bit of film. You may repeat something 50 times. They will cut heaps. So for the two Catalyst documentaries, I did so much more than actually showed up in the final cut, because they'll take this huge amount of film and really condense it down into what they feel are the really good bits. So I found that really entertaining, because I had no idea how television even worked until I started doing these sorts of things. So those are the pros. The cons is that it can be months and months of time commitment, and not just the on-camera work, which is exhausting because you are essentially talking in some cases for 10 hours a day. You may be moving between different locations. It can be kind of physically demanding because you may have to stand the whole time and try to control your body movements for, it's very tiring. There's also a time commitment in terms of the research, because you probably will need to do more research than you would for just a quick thing, because they're going to have different ideas and be like, oh, actually, we're going to do this other scene. What do you know about that? Well, nothing. So I'm going to spend the next couple of days learning about this thing so I can say it, with confidence. I find it very hard, as I said, to not be self-conscious when you can see all of you and you're talking. We all have things about ourselves we don't like. I guess the pro is that what I found is that I always look way better on TV than I do in real life. So, they do a really good job of having really nice lighting, and they'll help you out often with like, here's some suggestions for the types of clothes to wear and those sorts of things. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of nice. I'm like, it's a good looking person over there. She sounds great. But yeah, it can be very self-conscious. I think the other thing to say is that that extra exposure is nice, but it also has sort of an icky side to it, which can be really distressing. So with the slime mold documentary, for example, that was released in the US to a very wide audience. I got lots of emails about it, which was nice. Most of them were like, oh, it was really inspiring, but you do get creepy ones, unfortunately. I think that's part of being a woman in media, which sucks. But you get people who are like, I noticed you have a wedding ring on. Like, I'm really upset and I'd love to marry you. And like marriage proposals and just weird, creepy stuff. And I found that really scary at the time because, I mean, I have a very Googleable name. It's not hard for people to figure out where I am. Didn't like that part of it. So I do think it's worth having a thought about, you are going to be potentially more exposed than you would be doing radio, for example, where nobody can see you, and where it's very difficult to take note of your name or anything like that. So I'd say those are the downsides. Overall, I've enjoyed it, and I still take this kind of media, because I do think it's fun, and I do think it's a good way to get out there. For me, I think I also feel quite strongly about representation, and there aren't that many Black female scientists that people are going to listen to or see. So I feel like I need to be out there to be like, hey, we exist, we're a thing. Everyone's mileage with that will differ, but for me, that's important enough to kind of override some of the aspects of it. But yeah, I do think it is worth having a think of whether it's the kind of work you'd want to do. Look at that. Yay. So that's kind of the quick, I guess, overall arching thing of media stuff. Kate and I thought it might be really useful just to open up for a chunk of Q&A, because maybe you have questions, and between the two of us, I think we've got a fair amount of experience. And so why don't we just do that for a little while? We'll open up, and if you've got questions, just, unmute yourself.
And just, go for it. If we're not comfortable answering, we've got lots of training in saying no with that.
That's right.
See how we go.
We're very confident at deflecting.
Well, yeah, either that or I'll just go like, I gotta go.
It's like, oh, someone's calling.
Sorry about the phone call I had.
Yeah.
Hey, I had a question, if I can go.
Yeah.
Thanks for the talk so far, it's been great. I don't know if you're going to cover it or not, but the biggest way I probably engage with people on science is through Twitter. And I was kind of, I don't really know. Do you have like sort of specific tips or tricks for Twitter engagement and getting your science like adequately communicated in 180 characters or whatever it is like that? What are your thoughts generally on Twitter?
Dan is just selectively muting and hiding. Excellent. I mean, God, what a platform, right? I mean, you can go down some pretty crazy rabbit holes, and you can get caught up in some pretty messy stuff on Twitter if you want to. I think keeping it light, keeping it positive, keeping it, has always been a more successful strategy. What is it? Something about honey and vinegar and flies, something like that. I guess Twitter, what did I learn? That it's like a really small proportion of people in Australia use Twitter, and that like places like Instagram and those sorts of social media outlets are have much bigger reach. And other ones that the young people are using. TikToks and those sorts of things. I think it's all just about like keeping things really positive. That seems to be my experience. There's this cool bug, and isn't it cool kind of deal. Any temptation to the dark side, I think, sort of just is really counterproductive in my opinion.
I'm scared of Twitter. Like, I have a Twitter account and I use it, but I mostly just retweet, again, very light things or very sciencey things. I don't have opinions on Twitter. That I think some people do that very well. I don't, and I don't really want to get dragged into Twitter fights or controversies or any of that, because I don't have the sense that we as a society have really figured out how to deal with our online worlds versus our in-person worlds. Like, and I'm terrified that I'll say something and end up stuck in some sort of horrible Twitter controversy that spills into the real life. So, I use it very sparingly, mostly to retweet, and yeah, always positive. I try to avoid anything that's going to be, remotely controversial, which is a little cowardly, I know, but I don't have time for that kind of drama.
I think I go a little bit into, I'm to dip my toe into political stuff sometimes on Twitter. Maybe like, that might be a terrible idea, and I sometimes think, what are you doing? But I do feel like, most of our science, like animal behavior and natural history science and all that stuff, it is political. We do have, by presenting to the world as a particular kind of scientist, you are, typically part of a philosophical movement that, is knowledge-centric and data-centric and evidence-based and all those things, right? So I think for me personally, I don't mind standing up for those things in that kind of a public forum when I think that it's possible and okay. But does it translate to anything? Does anyone care? Is anyone listening? Is an entirely different question. It might just make me feel a little bit less powerless, a tiny bit more powerful, but in reality, it may not. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate the. I think I agree a lot on those points around trying to stay out of things that are too controversial, because I agree with Tanya's comments around that we don't really as a society know how to handle online presence particularly well. A follow-up and something I was hoping to get into on the Twitter side of things, but also branching beyond that, is I find that it can be quite an echo chamber. Like you find, I think Kate said it earlier on, that you start just interacting with those few people that are gonna, think alike. If you're someone like me who's a PhD student and you're not getting called onto TV shows, and you're not, you don't have a lot of maybe confidence to write for like big publications or things, what's the first thing you would do to get out of that echo chamber and like break beyond your normal bubble?
Yeah, it's really hard because, we do tend to associate with people that are like ourselves, and even the conversation, which that is my answer, is to write stuff for the conversation, because not so much because the conversation isn't a bubble, because the conversation is 100% a bubble of like people who want to read stuff that academics write, but because it gets picked up by other people. And that's one of the kind of ways you can start getting to a broader audience. There's other things that I've done that, it's really hard. So stuff like science in the pub and science in there's a whole bunch of different things where you can do science in non-traditional outlets. Those are helpful, I think, because again, you're getting potentially people who are not necessarily into your particular research. But again, who signs up to go listen to a scientist speak at a pub, right? Like you're already kind of on side, right? Even if it's not for your thing specifically. So I think it's hard. I think accepting, again, those media invitations that maybe not 100% the outlets that I listen to, but, if I can talk to, an extremely conservative radio station about environmental issues, there's going to be plenty of people listening to that who do care about environmental stuff. Whether I agree with everything they're saying, and again, it's a fine line because you don't want to go too dark side in whichever direction you want to go. But, if you can find those slightly more moderate venues, then that can be a way to get a little bit outside your bubble. But it's just really hard. Like I feel like it's extremely difficult, and it's something we all have to, as a group, we kind of need to figure out how to reach kind of those people that don't want to hear what we want to say.
Yeah, this is sort of the great question, right? This is what politicians constantly deal with. How do I get people on my side that aren't voting for me? Like it's all kind of the same big, tricky sociology problem. One thing that's helped me one thing that may, help get out of one's bubble is by having a really wide network, like a really wide network. So, you know, making friends with, God forbid, like physicists and people like that, right? And going to, you know, going to social events, you know, I don't know, like going to conferences outside your field, or going to, it doesn't have to be like expensive and time consuming and that sort of thing, but trying to have a very broad scientific network will help you get beyond, you know, evolutionary ecology, then it'll help you get beyond biology, and then it'll help you get, you know, sort of try to just, like if you want to deliberately extend, then I think it's about building human relationships, which is, you know, hard and convoluted and all that jazz, but that might be one way. Like the Superstars of STEM program, you know, enabled us, all of us 30 women in that particular cohort, to have this little power circle where we are a part of like all these different, like a STEM, but that's it. And so we have like a little Slack team, and we say, hey, can everyone retweet this thing for me? And all of a sudden you're reaching teachers and bioarchaeologists and all of these people in these different disciplines that you'd never have otherwise found. So, you know, it doesn't answer the question of how you get to like, you know, really outside your bubble, but yeah, maybe bubbles within reach.
I think the arts are also a good inroad. There's lots of cool art science collaboration type things. If you can get involved in those, you get that broader audience. I did one recently that was you get partnered with a band, and then the band writes a song based on essentially a conversation you have over a couple of Zoom meetings. It was super cool. It's so cool. Yeah, and that was a cool way to talk to. I mean, again, you're dealing with musicians who already care about science, or they wouldn't be part of this. But you know, not all their listeners will. You know, and they might get kind of interested when they are listening to them talk about this time they talked to a scientist about how insects are really cool. And you know, there's those little kind of things you can start to do that are, you know, interacting with people who still have that interest, but whose audiences may not necessarily have those interests.
And like if there's stuff that Tanya and I have done, like that band thing or whatever, that you guys think might be cool, then just like, you know, because it's all that stuff is on our website. It's like we've done this and this and blah, blah. And you can just say, hey, that sounded cool. How can I be part of that? Like, is that program still going? Or, you know, it's really one of those ones of, I'm interested, you know, yeah, especially like you're saying, to start out with, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question. Actually, it's two parts question. So the first one is, how does it fit in the career of the person? So does that mean that this part becomes kind of like, I'm a scientist, a researcher, but also a science communicator. So does it mean that I have to split the time in my career, or should I actually choose to completely go and be a science communicator and do less research? That's my first question. And the second question was, what are the tips to train that kind of skills? Like, for example, I don't know, like kind of to do a little bit of acting, you know, or something like that, to kind of in preparation for this TV or documentaries or stuff like that, to feel kind of more comfortable. And yeah, that's my question.
I did drama for high school, so I mean, obviously, I'm sure you can tell.
That's so cool.
I did not. I said, sure, I did like year 10 drama. We learned how to be mimes. It was good. It was really exciting. I guess the first part is an excellent question that I do not have an answer to, because I haven't figured that out myself yet. I think certainly when you're starting out, it's a good idea not to overcommit in the science communication if a research career is what you really, really want. Simply because we have, you know, there's so many high pressure publication demands on us. And I think still doing some science communication will always help you and rarely harm you. But you might not want to spend like half your time doing science communication, half doing research, because you know, somebody will be doing 90% research and only 10% science communication. The research will tend to be, that's what people are going to look for on CVs much more than the science communication if you want an academic career. Unfortunately, I found that the media stuff doesn't count for a whole lot from like the academic job progression side. On the flip side, it is, again, useful for getting those contacts with people and just so that people know who you are and like, oh, I don't know her research particularly, but I heard this person talking about this cool thing. And, you know, you're in their minds when they're thinking about looking at postdocs or whatever. So a little bit's good. I think it is hard to go, yeah, half and half, especially at the beginning. As you get more secure in your position, you'll find that that's easier. So, you know, where I am now, I'm not so worried about doing a lot of science communication because I have students now who do most of my research for me. So in that sense, it's a little bit easier to spend more time doing the science communication now. And also because I have a permanent job. So, you know, I'm not as worried about falling off, you know, and not getting a position. But when I was starting out, for sure, I did some science communication, but focused more on the research. If you do want to go the other way and go like on the much more science communication stream, there are some people who've done a really good job, I think, of having academic positions that are also based in science communication. So Alice Motion comes to mind at University of Sydney. She's a chemist by training, but her research has really turned more into science communication. So she studies science communication to a large extent now, and that allows her to keep doing lots of, you know, the SciComm that she likes to do, but she can also kind of turn that into her research. So there's clever ways to do it if you want to say have a research career, but you'd like that to still have a big chunk of SciComm, then maybe consider doing that. And there's a lot of interest now about how to communicate science effectively. So, you know, that can become a research field in itself. So as far as the 100% like a full-on science communicator position, I'm not sure. That was sort of always my fallback plan if, you know, academia didn't work out, maybe, but I think it's a hard road. I think you really need to figure out where you'd be able to fit and whether that's a writer and getting lots of freelance gigs that you can eventually get, you know, a well-paying sort of job doing science writing is probably the easiest way.
Yeah.
I think radio and TV, a lot less so as far as like ongoing gigs, unless you get really, really lucky. And there just happens to be a show. It's unlikely to, I think, be a full-time paying thing. But writing, I feel like you can make a go of it. And there was a second question I forgot. Sorry.
Oh, about kind of like the tips and tricks for training these skills, like this more like less sciencey and more like engaging. Yeah.
I just popped up a bunch of links. Like I just did a quick Google, a bunch of links of people that provide training to Australian scientists for media. Just, you know, off the top of the first page of Google, there's actually quite a lot. I don't think, I suspect that quite a lot of it is also free. Not all, obviously, but I think there's probably quite a lot. But the SciMex comes to mind as something that I wanted to mention. So that's like a register of scientific experts that the media can access, and so anyone can sign up for that, and you can say all the stuff that that you'd be willing to talk about, and I'm sure there's a New Zealand equivalent, and that way, like, you know, when we need a cockroach person, you know, and then like your name pops up, right? So that's can be a way to just get media attention. That is a way, I guess, that sort of answers Shaq's question as well about like trying to get out of your bubble a little bit. But yeah, there's oh, it's for both. Okay, cool. Yeah, there's actually quite a lot, and you know, keep your eye out for sort of competitive programs, you know, that if you want to get into what's the top 5 under 40. I don't know who does that, but there's some, yeah, I don't know, there's a whole bunch of schemes that pop up here and there that try to encourage people into that. But the only thing I would say about the previous question is that, you know, you kind of run the risk of being like a kind of, you know, crappy version of both things if you try to do both, because I feel like, you know, science communication, you know, not that you would have that impression from how many jobs are available, but it is its own profession, right? And it's like, you know, Tanya and I have come to media from science, and people that come to science from media, you know, do it really differently. And it's cool to work with people that come, you know, through the Australian Film and Television School and all that kind of stuff, because yeah, like turning hotel conference rooms into, you know, science labs and things is their bag, right? And it's cool, it's really neat, and it really helps. Like I'm definitely I'm better at communicating science in general because of interacting with those folks. So Yeah, you probably got to pick one, particularly early. I would say you got to have one's got to be a definite side hustle.
Yeah.
And if you're already in a PhD program, which most of you probably already are, then I think you've already made that decision for now. It doesn't mean you can't change your mind into the future. But for now, I think, that's probably.
I'll also say, as far as like developing either of those later on, start having a portfolio, just a folder on your computer, and every little thing that you do put in there.
It's really
because it's, a year will go by and you won't remember. Like, you'll forget that you did that article or that you had that interview or whatever. And those sorts of things are really important later on, especially if you want to do more, again, like writing. They'll ask, what have you done previously? And it's nice when you just have a folder you can go to say, well, actually, I've done this, and I download all the clips of the various, whenever I can download a clip, I do. And I don't look at it, but I put it in the folder so that I have it. If anybody ever asks, like, do you have any on-camera experience? I can be like, here are the things I've done. And it's just been collected over the last 10 years, slowly getting bigger. That's really, I think that's useful.
Even better, or like, whatever bits of that you're comfortable with, you should be putting them on your, like on a website, right? So, especially if you're interested in science communication, then, you should have that under development when you start your PhD, and it's an online CV.
Yeah.
People are going to Google you as the first thing they're going to do, right? If I get an email from someone saying, hey, you want to do anything like research or interview you or whatever, I always look and see what their online presence is first before I.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. All of that is great advice.
No worries. I'd say also for writing, if you're thinking about doing a lot of writing, there are lots of free online writing courses. Some of them are even like high school or first year university, and it feels like I know better than that, but those courses are often amazing because as scientists, we're not really trained in the way to write for an audience. We know how to write papers, but that's really, really different than writing like in a journalistic style. And so taking some of those are useful. I took a fiction writing course on, I think it was Coursera or one of these online courses where you don't have to pay anything. It was just a free one. And that was really useful too, because it sort of talked about like descriptive writing and how to set up, in this case, a fictional story, but you can take those skills and apply them to your science writing. I know Udemy has like a science writing a course for nonfiction writing that I'm about halfway through. Those are expensive if you don't know that if you just keep hitting refresh, usually eventually you'll get like the 90% off discount that Udemy does, and it's like $15. So you just have to wait for it to reach that $15 point. And then, all of those little things I think are useful if writing is what you want to do, because like Kate said, there's people who have studied writing and now they're doing science writing, but they have a whole degree in writing. And if you're just kind of being like, I'm a scientist and people should listen to me, so I wrote something really quick, then you're not going to be able to compete. So it's nice to have those. And then it also makes your papers better, I find, if you have that writing training. As far as the on-camera stuff goes, I don't have any specific acting training. I talk to myself a lot. So that is how I practice. I will pace around my room, like before I do a radio thing, going over what I want to say. Sometimes I look at the mirror just to kind of get a sense of how how I move. And that's, everyone will have their own way of doing it. But for me, I feel a lot more confident if I know pretty much what I'm going to say. Also because I have a tic that comes out when I'm nervous or stressed or hungry. And if I practice, then it's less likely to pop out in an inopportune moment than if I just am like, and I freak out. I'm like, again, it's like, so that works for me. Some people just wing it. I can't do that. But some folks just have that natural like charisma. They can walk in and do stuff, but that's not me. So
although like you say that stuff about like too much body language, like we're both like and all that sort of thing. I actually also think that's a kind of okay, because it's sort of it's is it a kind of diversity? I don't know, you know what I mean? Like newsreaders have this look, right? And they're like got their lapels and all the jazz, and I'm just like, yeah, but that takes years and years and years of training to look like that while you're talking on the telly. And I just think maybe we could just be a little bit more normal. Maybe we could have tics. Maybe we could use our hands too much. Maybe that would be okay, and the information would still get across. Like, there's definitely a line, like, you know, and it's different. But I sometimes think that normalizing that kind of behavior can also be really useful.
I just wanted to add something that I just remembered as well, that if you're keen on, like, you have some cool research topic, or you want to talk about your research topic or anything like this, and you're trying to find a place to publish and you're still not too like comfortable with going to big media, well, ASSAB has something for you. We have our blog that we just started up. So if you go to our website, I can just send here, but it's assab.org/blog. There's their little submission for you to submit what you would like to talk about. And then you would be super free to kind of like present your research the way you would like to. And we'll be really keen because we'll be posting on our Twitter and we'll be sharing on Facebook as well. And yeah, we'll have it on our website. So lots of places for you to spread the word. So that's a good kind of start.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and you never know who might pick up that sort of stuff. You just, you know, we pop it out there and you see. But yeah, it's a friendly way to start. I was expecting people to ask us about our worst media experiences and our best media experiences.
I was going to say, you did tease some horror stories at the start.
The reason I bring it up is because I still get comfort from a story that one of my honors supervisors told me about his experience. I'm not going to tell his experience, but I can tell one of mine that I may be equally comforting. I just remember when he told me the story, I was like, oh my God, like that can happen. And he was like, yeah, but psh, you know, whatever. So like for me, the story is that, so not all of you have seen me in the flesh before, but I'm around about 6 foot tall, so like 180 centimeters, and you know, fairly athletic build. So like I'm not a small person, I think it's fair to say. And and I was starting off my PhD working in the Snowy Mountains, and a woman from the Snowy Times wanted to interview me about my research, and I got this story back, and I was just absolutely gobsmacked because the opening kind of paragraph was, she was walking through the mountains and she looked to her left and she saw what she thought was the Alpine Fairy, but actually it was Kate Umbers, a researcher from Macquarie University. And I was just like, wow, wow. You know, so it took me a while to live down the whole Alpine Fairy.
Wow. You probably shouldn't have told me that, Kate.
Yeah, I've got copies of that newspaper and I'm just like, oh my, wow. Like, just besides the fact that like, it's just like, it doesn't fit me, you know, like I don't.
Should be your Twitter handle now.
I know, right?
That's amazing.
That was my first ever media. So, but, you know, and it's sort of like, wow, okay. But you know, like, it didn't have any long-term consequences, and now that Tanya knows, maybe it will, but
Yes, it will. Can confirm.
It's sort of worth knowing that like crazy stuff like that can be said about you, and you know, it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't have a long life. It was in the Snowy Times, you know, like, so people, you know, that went skiing in 2007 and picked up the local newspaper probably, you know, were, you know, read that and or whatever, you know. So it's just sort of worth knowing that, you know, sort of wacko stuff can happen, but it's okay, and it happens to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I have not a similar story, but also a height related story. Because height-wise, I'm kind of the opposite of Kate. I'm about 155 centimeters stretching, like I'm short. And we were filming something with another researcher who is extremely tall. And so they had us sit standing beside each other, and the camera guy stopped, kind of looked at us and went, Yeah, no, this looks really terrible.
Oh,
So
no.
the size difference. And so they got a milk crate and made me stand on the milk crate so that you couldn't tell that I was as short as I was. But even that wasn't working. So they ended up having me tottering on 2 milk crates to try to look like I was roughly the same height in the frame as the other person. You know, I'm trying to do stuff without falling off of milk crates.
Oh, man, that's great.
It was interesting.
So it can get weird, but yeah, but it's not about you. It's about the content. It's about what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
So if there's no more sort of Q&A questions, we thought we might spend the last sort of half hour giving you a little exercise that is obviously 100% optional. If you'd like to have a go at pitching your, like, not, sorry, wait a minute. We're not going to ask you to do anything, you know, where you have to do like talk to the Zoom room or anything like that. It's just one of the kind of classic things in media is your elevator pitch, which for those of you who don't know what it is, it's just essentially what you would say to a stranger in an elevator with the amount of time that you have to get between the levels. So just a very short kind of summary of what you do. Like when you go to these media training things, there's often lots of little exercises about how to do these kinds of things. And one kind of neat strategy is to explain. So can I get a show of hands of who's doing a PhD or a master's project, or who's doing a research project? Is it pretty much everybody? I like the disembodied hand coming up from Linda. That was great. Okay, so yeah, so I mean it's an obvious thing to choose, right? Like the topic for your PhD is something you could hone. But the way, one cool way to do it is to explain it to somebody in 1 minute, and then get them to give you feedback on what they understood, like get them to basically repeat what they understood, then do it in 30 seconds, and then do it in 10 seconds, with the idea of just trying to get it down to its bare bones and in its simple language. You know, so you might start off with this big long rant about, you know, this fairy wren and blah, 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 and all these things. And then, I mean, I really like birds. And fairy wren's my favorite. But yeah, like female song or whatever, you know, and kind of plumage and all that stuff. And then, you know, by the 10 seconds, you get down to, I'm interested in how birds communicate with each other using color. You know, something like that. So it really needs to capture what you do, plain language and all that sort of thing. So we thought like there's a couple of options. Like you could partner up with people that are here, or you could take that exercise away with you and do it, you know, with your partner or at home or like a friend or, you know, whatever, as a way of trying to get that, Cheerio, Madeline, as a way of trying to get that skill. Or you could, you know, try it on myself or Tanya or whoever you like. But it's super handy actually, because it's amazing how often you get asked that question, you know, and you really need to, it matters if you nail it in a lot of contexts, particularly like if you're talking to big cheeses at conferences or, you know, I don't know, just anyone really, like being kind of stuck like a deer in the headlights when you know, when you try to explain this sort of stuff can be uncomfortable for you and disengaging for the person that's asked you. So yeah, so what do you think about, and like I said, you know, we can use breakout rooms and you can just talk like to each other, or you can not do it. Whatever you, yeah, please skip, that's fine, no worries at all. Whatever you like. Was there any other exercises you had in mind, Tanya, that were useful things for this kind of stuff?
No, not really.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so it's just an opportunity for those of you who would like to do this, to stay around and give it a try. And equally, if you'd like to head off, that's okay. I think we don't have anything planned after this. Is that right? Yep.
No.